There's been an outpouring of celebration on Twitter for the murder of 5 police officers. Tweet after tweet after tweet can be read by supporters of the Black Lives Matter organization squealing with delight over the murders in Dallas on Thursday night. Calling the police pigs, the gunman a hero, and calls for more murder is mirrored in the streets of several cities in the U.S. that are now marred by protests with people chanting Black Lives Matter. But aside from the revelry by parts of the black community for the gunman and the jubilation that Black Lives Matter supporters are feeling by the slayings, even going as far as to celebrate and hold victory dances in front of the police forces that have just lost 5 of their own, we really need to slow down and think for a minute. In 2014, according to statistics compiled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, there were 187 blacks that were killed by white people, while there were 446 white people that were killed by black people. Now, while blacks have killed more than double the number of whites, you have to remember that blacks only make up around 13% of the population. To put it another way, blacks are killing whites grossly disproportionate to the rates that whites are killing blacks. Well, okay, that's not the point of Black Lives Matter. So let's take a look at police shootings. Police killed nearly twice as many whites as blacks in 2015. There were 258 blacks killed by police, while there were 494 whites that were killed by police. The majority of these victims had a gun or were armed or otherwise threatening the officer with potentially lethal force. Some may argue that these statistics are evidence of racist treatment toward blacks, since whites consist of 62% of the population and blacks make up 13% of the population. But as pointed out in the Wall Street Journal, 2009 statistics from the Bureau of Justice Statistics revealed that blacks were charged with 62% of robberies, 57% of murders, and 45% of assaults in the 75 biggest counties in the country, despite only comprising roughly 15% of the population in these counties. Such a concentration of criminal violence in minority communities means that officers will be disproportionately confronting armed and often resisting suspects in those communities, raising officers' own risk of using lethal force. Also, when looking at America's largest city, blacks commit 75% of all shootings, 70% of all robberies, and 66% of all violent crime in New York City, even though they consist of 23% of the city's population. Black and Hispanic police officers are more likely to fire a gun at blacks than white officers. This is according to a Department of Justice report in 2015 about the Philadelphia Police Department, and is further confirmed by a study conducted at the University of Pennsylvania by criminologist Gary Ridgway, also in 2015, that determined black cops were 3.3 times more likely to fire a gun than other cops at a crime scene. More importantly, blacks are more likely to kill cops than be killed by cops. This is according to FBI data, which also found that 40% of all cop killers are black. According to research carried out by Heather McDonald, the police officer is 18.5 times more likely to be killed by a black than a cop killing an unarmed black person. These statistics all clearly show that non-whites in general and blacks in particular commit both in real terms and proportionately far more crimes than do whites. Despite the facts, the anti-police rhetoric of Black Lives Matter and their leftist sympathizers have resulted in what McDonald calls the Ferguson effect, as murders have spiked by 17% among the 50 biggest cities in the US as a result of cops being more reluctant to police neighborhoods out of fear of being labeled as racists. Additionally, there have been over twice as many cops victimized by fatal shootings in the first 3 months of 2016. Anti-police rhetoric has deadly consequences. These numbers, which reflect the reality of the situation, do not matter to those protesting in the streets, squealing Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is not about resisting heavy-handed policing. It is not about seeking justice. It's not about finding solutions to the horrific and intergenerational problems that plague the black community in the United States. It's an organization funded by the elusive and shadowy George Soros to a tune of $33 million that's being used to divide people. Barack Obama, the first African-American president, whether meaning to or not, has done more to undermine race relations than any other person in recent American history. And now, in part thanks to him, 5 police officers have been murdered. Do Black Lives matter? Of course they do. But the chance of a violent death meeting an African American is much more likely at the hands of another African American rather than by a police officer. No one is excusing heavy-handed policing or the unnecessary use of force, but heavy-handed policing is not the disease. It is but a symptom of what ails the black community in the United States. But for real and positive change to come, a frank, open, and honest discussion about the dysfunctional nature of the black community and how it feeds into the grossly disproportionate violent crime rates committed by African Americans needs to happen. Black Lives Matter is not helping advance the interests of the African American community. On the contrary, they are helping bring race relations in the U.S. to their lowest point in decades.